I traveled to Philadelphia to try some of the best cheesesteaks in the city, with the goal of answering one question: what actually makes a great Philly cheesesteak? Now, my ultimate goal is to make a recipe that anyone can follow to make an authentic cheesesteak at home. And I'm willing to go to any lengths necessary in order to get there. But before we can do that, we need to try the real thing. So we're at a spot called Dalessandro's. So I ordered this one whiz wit, meaning with cheese whiz and with onions, but we'll talk more about all that later. For now, let's give it a try. All right, so a few things I know about this place. The first is that they use thinly sliced ribeye, which is really the traditional cut for a Philly cheesesteak. But what they do different than a lot of other places is chop it up really finely on the griddle to create sort of a minced texture. But another thing I found out is that they actually don't season the meat on the griddle, and to me that really does come through. The meat tastes a little bit under-seasoned, and there's not really enough cheese on here to make up for it. I will say though, the roll is really good. It's super soft and chewy with a little bit of crustiness on the exterior, and I do also know that they get these rolls from Amoroso's, which has been around for a really long time. As far as I know, they're basically the originator of this style of roll, or if not, they're at least the most popular. Speaking of originators though, this next place is one that actually invented the Philly cheesesteak, and I actually don't have the highest of hopes for it based on what I've heard, but I wanted to check it out just for the tradition of it. And one of the nice things about it is they're open 24 hours. All right, so it's 7:42 in the morning, and I'd say it's about time for a cheesesteak. So we're at Pat's King of Steaks. It claims to be the originator of the Philly cheesesteak, but the reason I said I don't have super high expectations is because it's kind of become a touristy spot over the years. But even so, I had to give it a try. All right, so I ordered mine whiz wit, same thing I got at Dalessandro's. So it's actually not bad. They put a lot of whiz on it, which I actually do kind of like. The main difference though is the way that the meat is cut. You can see on this one, it's still thinly sliced ribeye, but they don't really chop it up on the grill quite as much. It seems like it's mostly just preference as far as which method you use. And for me, I think I still need to decide which one I like better. Not a huge difference in the bread, still that nice soft roll. The flavor of the onions on this one does come through a little bit more. I think they just didn't cook them down quite as much. But again, this isn't really about which is best. It's really just to get a feel for what actually makes a sandwich so that I can replicate it at home. But overall, definitely a pretty solid sandwich. So let's move on to the next one. All right, so we're here at John's Roast Pork, and you can see right off the bat, this one looks a little bit different than the others. The roll definitely has sort of a more rustic feel to it, reminding me a lot more of a homemade roll than sort of the commercial, softer rolls that I've had at the first couple places. All right, so the first thing I noticed, the cut of meat seems to be a little bit different. It's still those kind of bigger slices like what we saw at Pat's. And actually the owner of the restaurant came out here, so I was able to ask him what cut of meat they actually use. He said they use loin.
Loin tail, which is a little different.
It's a little bit of a leaner cut than the ribeye that you sometimes see. My one gripe with it, it's a little bit drier because of that lower fat content. I think you have to be really careful when you're cooking it. And I wish it did have a little more seasoning on it again. They might even be like Dalessandro's where they don't season the meat on the griddle. The other main thing with this one though is the cheese. So when it comes to a Philly cheesesteak, there are basically three main cheeses that you might choose from. The first is American, the second is provolone, and the third is the cheese whiz like what I've gotten at the first two places. Now here they don't do cheese whiz, so I ended up going with the extra sharp provolone. And to me, I think it has a little bit too sort of strong and funky of a flavor. It kind of overpowers the steak, and really with this sandwich, the steak should be the star of the show. So for me, when I'm making my recipe, I don't think I'm gonna go with provolone. I still have to try American at some of these next couple places, but I'm definitely gonna come up with a whiz recipe because personally I do like that. And even though I know not everybody does, I at least want to have that available as an option. Now, as far as the roll, I actually do like this one too. I don't know that I have a preference between this and the softer roll. It's still got a very soft interior, but I do like that contrast of the sort of crustier outside. But speaking of rolls, this next place is one that does them a little bit differently as well. And this is the one that I got the most suggestions to visit. So I'm really curious to give it a try. In the meantime, I'm gonna hang out back here at the hotel with a glass of wine from this video's sponsor, Bright Cellars. Bright Cellars aims to take the snobbery out of wine drinking. It matches you up with wines you love, even if you have no clue where to start. All you have to do is take Bright Cellars' quick 7-question quiz, and they'll match you up with wines from all over the world, curated exactly to your taste. Then you just choose how many bottles you'd like, and they'll get delivered straight to your doorstep with free shipping. And my favorite part is that each bottle comes with a wine education card that outlines tasting notes, suggested pairings, best serving temperatures, and so on, so that I can pretend I actually know what I'm talking about. On this Cabernet Sauvignon, I'm tasting warm notes of vanilla, caramel, and baking spices. Personally, I love using the wine cards to find the perfect food pairing and then build a meal around it. For example, a few nights ago, I made these chicken mole enchiladas to go with this Tannat wine. So if you're like me and you love trying new flavors, Bright Cellars is where it's at. And right now they're offering my viewers a limited time offer of $100 off your subscription, which is the best offer they've ever had. Just click my link in the description below to get started. Sponsors like Bright Cellars make it possible for me to keep making this content, so purchasing through my link is just one more way that you can directly support the channel. So thanks again to Bright Cellars for sponsoring sponsoring this video, and thank you for your support. Now let's go get another cheesesteak. All right, so here we go. This is from Angelo's Pizzeria, and even though it is a pizzeria, a lot of people say that they have the best cheesesteaks. So again, you can see the roll is pretty similar in style to John's roast pork. It's a little bit more rustic, and they actually bake them in-house right at the restaurant. Wow, that is really good. Easily the best one I've had yet. So I got it with American cheese, which I actually really like, and they put a perfect amount on it. Super nice and melty with a little bit of tanginess, but not overpowering like the provolone was. The steak, again, chopped up pretty finely, not quite as finely as Dalessandro's, but more fine than some of the other places I've tried. And actually, I was a little worried about the bread. I thought it might be too rustic for this type of sandwich, but it's not sort of hard and crusty like a baguette. It's still got that nice chewiness to it, but a really, really good flavor. Wow, I mean, I just can't. Yeah, I mean, to me, this is almost like the perfect cheesesteak. If I can find a way to make something like this at home, I think I'll be pretty happy. But even so, there are still a few more places I want to try, which we're gonna do tomorrow. So I'll see you there. All right, so it's actually a pretty nice day out here today, so I found a quiet spot to come eat this. But this is from Steve's Prince of Steaks up on the north side of Philadelphia. And this is actually the only place that I saw them making the sandwich. And the main thing I noticed is that they took the slices of ribeye and basically just seared the whole pieces on both sides and then gently placed them onto the grill. Stark contrast from somewhere like Dalessandro's, who basically just chops it like crazy on the griddle. But let's give it a try. So definitely a very solid sandwich. Obviously I got it with whiz again and onions. I'm still trying to decide whether I like the whiz or the American cheese better. But the main thing that hits me with this sandwich is, number one, I probably would have preferred a little bit more meat. It just doesn't have nearly as much as some of the other places. But the other thing is, I'm not really the biggest fan of those big chunks of ribeye. They're a little bit too chewy for my taste, almost like you're eating an actual steak. To me, they should kind of blend a little bit more into the sandwich. One thing I will say though is the roll is pretty good here. It's more of that commercial style roll. Slightly crusty exterior, but a really soft interior. So definitely no complaints there. The other thing is the onions. To me, they could have been cooked down a little bit more. They still have a little too much bite and sort of oniony flavor to them. And some of the better places I tried, they kind of just blend into the sandwich and add that nice sweetness without too much oniony flavor. So there are a few more places I could try, but I think at this point, I've got a pretty good idea of what makes a great cheesesteak. And instead, I have an idea that I think is gonna be a little bit better use of my time. I brought home some souvenirs. And by souvenirs, I mean rolls. I brought home some rolls, but not just any rolls. I got the iconic Amoroso rolls, like the ones used at Dalessandro's and a lot of other cheesesteak spots in Philly. And I also froze some, so as I develop my recipe, I can check in on my progress. But that's not all, because if you remember, I also really love the style of roll that they use at John's Roast Pork and at Angelo's. And actually, when I talked to the owner at John's, he gave me the name of the bakery that they actually use. It's a place called Karanji Bakery, just a little Italian bakery in South Philly, but they make really good rolls, so I definitely recommend you check them out if you're ever in the area. So in addition to that giant one, I also got some mini ones in the same size as my Amoroso rolls. On top of all that though, I also saved half of each of my sandwiches so that I could compare them side by side back here at the lab. And after some further analysis, I think I'm ready to build my ideal cheesesteak recipe. Now the one non-negotiable is that we need to start with a thinly sliced, relatively fatty cut of beef. I'll have to do some more testing before I can decide exactly which cut, but one thing I can decide on right now is how I want to prepare it, because really there are just three different methods. You've got the fully intact slices of beef like what we saw at Steve's, you've got the super fine chop like what we saw at Dalessandro's, and then you've got somewhere in between like what we saw at most of the other spots. Now for me, the big slices were definitely my least favorite, so those are out. Between the last two options though, I didn't hate the fine chop, but that also makes it pretty easy to overcook the meat and dry it out. So I think for me, that middle option is perfect. I will probably err more toward the side of finely chopped though, maybe like something we saw at Angelo's, because I do think that helps the cheese to melt into the meat a lot better and create a more cohesive sandwich. Personally, I'm also gonna add some onion on my cheesesteaks, but you don't have to use those if you don't want to. Now speaking of the cheese, again, there are three options here. So as we discussed earlier, I am gonna develop a whiz recipe, because number one, I do actually like the whiz, but also number two, I don't think it would be a true Philly cheesesteak recipe if we don't at least have that available as an option. Now between the whizzes I tried, I really couldn't tell any difference. For all I know, they could have all just been Kraft Cheese Whiz. But what I do know is that I'm gonna try to create my own recipe that's a bit more interesting than the classic stuff. Then for my non-whiz option, I think I'm gonna go with American cheese. I may also try a very mild provolone just for comparison, but anything too sharp or too funky is definitely out. Now last, but certainly not least, the rolls. And honestly, I'm kind of torn here because all of the rolls were really good. I did like the sort of commercial Amoroso style roll. It was super soft and chewy, but still pretty sturdy. Pretty much unlike anything I'd ever had before. And it's definitely the more classic style for a Philly cheesesteak. But I also really love the more rustic style rolls like those at John's Roast Pork and at Angelo's. I may actually have to do recipes for both. But if anyone has any preferences, let me know in the comments below. Honestly though, I'm thinking the two will be pretty similar anyways, because they both got that same softness and chewiness on the inside. It's mostly just the exterior that's different. But if my quest for the perfect New York style pizza dough is any indication, it's probably a bit harder to nail down than it seems at first glance. So we better get started. Now in the meantime, I recommend you check out this series right here, where I successfully reverse engineered a New York slice, just like I'm trying to do here with the Philly cheesesteak. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in that next video.